Welcome to the inaugural episode of Unseen on the NAMM magazine. My name is Florentino Buenaventura, and I have the honor and privilege to be here at the NAMM Museum of Making music. And this is an exciting one because this is like one of the best kept gems. We don't want to be a best kept gem.
Yeah, we don't. We want to get the word out.
So we've been working with NAMM for many years, and quite often most people know about the big conference, but one of the things that is here in San Diego, up in Carlsbad area, not far away from Legoland. I don't know if Lego Batman runs through every so often, but it's an exciting place to learn about musical instruments, like the ones we have back here. BJ, you are pretty much the guy here for the museum. This is one of your babies, and you do a lot of stuff with NAMM. But tell us about your role and what you do, and how long have you been doing it?
Sure, yeah. So I'm the marketing manager here at the museum. I've been here 24 years now. So what we do here at the museum, we take a look at not celebrity instruments, not the best of the best, not the creams of the crop, but how you and I would have gotten our instruments, how they got from basically raw materials, like the company, the people, the families, the innovations behind creating those instruments, not just making music with them, but making the instruments themselves. And then how that goes from the workbench to your storefront, like your local mom and pop shop, your local retail outlet. Like, they have to be presented somewhere. You have to be provided these instruments somehow, right? What families were involved in that? What businesses were involved in that? And then what happens when the rubber hits the road? What happens when they get in the hands of the artists? NAMM, obviously we're the NAMM Museum of Making music.
We might want to give them a little, National Association of Musical Merchants. NAMM. Tell them a little bit about the organization that helps to put this all together for the community to see.
Right, and so that NAMM, you were talking about that's that global organization, the National Association of Music Merchants, that over 100 years old. And they've been doing trade shows since 1901. So over 100 years of trade shows and conventions. And so they lead this industry, this musical ecosystem of the people that make instruments, the people that sell the instruments. And they do all the work to help them bring those communities together, to advocate for that. There's also a foundation, the NAMM Foundation, that does all of the charitable work to create more and break down barriers to get access to making music. And so the museum is one of those programs, part of that NAMM Foundation, and that's what we do. We break down those barriers. We try and make these stories, this ecosystem, more accessible to people who love music. Maybe they're musicians, maybe they just love music, maybe they don't know the stories behind the families, behind the opportunities that are out there, and how we've gotten to where we are today,
And you bring these instruments to this amazing place. And this is kind of the first room. I mean, there's a little bit of a lobby, but this room in particular, is apropos. It's, how do you make instruments? And that's what this room is all about. Tell us a bit about the room, what they can see, and we'll look at a few of the instruments that are behind us and to the side of us.
Yeah, absolutely. So the museum storyline, kind of different themes. And so the room that we're in right now, our first gallery, if you will, is all about making the instruments. And every area in this gallery is a little vignette of a storyline, like the need to make instruments louder, how guitarists and guitar makers fortified their guitars with the X bracing, with all of the materials that went into that guitar to make them louder, because as time moved on, aside from becoming a solo instrument, you had a guitarist who was backing a jazz band, And so if you couldn't hear that guitarist,
those trumpet players,
they'll drown out those guitar players every time. So that's why you have these giant dreadnought guitars, to have that reinforced sound that would project all the way to the back of the theater.
Well, we've got a few instruments here. Tell us a bit about some of the ones that are here on the wall. We've got Curtis Ray Young's
one of the early, the signature Stratocasters, early Telecaster. We've got one of the early gold top Les Pauls too. They used to call them the logs because they're so heavy.
That was the one that I wanted to have as a kid, so if it's missing, it wasn't me.
And one of my favorite ones is the frying pan right here.
Oh yeah.
So one of the first examples of a commercially successful electric guitar was in the 1930s. And the Rickenbackers were the credited as being the first, developing that first commercially viable electric guitar. That is the production model of that. The first one that they made was carved out of wood at the kitchen table. We don't have that one. It exists. It's up in the Rickenbacker factory up there, just up the street.
So here's a question for you, because there was always a little bit of a debate. Was it the Rickenbacker or was it Slingerland that made the first production electric guitar? I've heard that there was a little bit of a
you know, when you get into this, area,
which is weird because Slingerland, folks, is a drum manufacturer.
When you get into this area, you see that the technology at the time, everybody was headed towards that direction. You might have one manufacturer having the idea of like, okay, this is my version of the pickup, but it would pick up all the distortion around it and wouldn't function the way they intended it to. And so, you know, what we say here and what we've researched and come up with is like, Rickenbacker gets the credit for having the first commercially viable, commercially successful. They might not have been the first one to patent. They might not have been the first one to like actually come up with the idea of creating a magnetized pickup system or electrified pickup system, but the one that they made is the one that ended up evolving into
everything, which becomes now
and
the guitars that Jimi Hendrix plays, that
well, and humbuckers came along too, and they were they were developing their own product too, but the technology at the time was lifting all of these makers up, that they said, how do I use this technology? How do I take advantage of this to make a product that will do this thing? And so even though they were all on the same trajectory, they took different paths. They came up with different products on their own, but they're all kind of in the same momentum.
It's interesting because we wouldn't have Pantera if we didn't have somebody playing Hawaiian music.
Something like that, yeah. You can link them that way if you want.
This is my stretch here, folks. So, and then we've got, of course, an acoustic upright bass, and then we've got
Steinberger upright bass too, which is Steinberger's innovations. He did a lot of the headless guitars, and so his tuning methods and his style is obviously, you can see visually very different from the early electrified upright basses, even the electrified, like with the P bass format, the side bass
first
format.
Fender, very cool, very cool. And then if we can get a shot of some of the keyboards before we move on to the next place.
So this vignette is actually, we take a look at life at home. So every vignette represents a different idea. And so this idea was, you had a changing residential format. When you didn't have your large countryside estates anywhere where you could fit a large grand piano in your parlor. As the economic centers moved to the cities, as family spaces moved from large farmhouses or large estates to smaller apartment-sized dwellings, you had to have instruments that you could bring with you and fit that format. So as you can see in this display, we take that beautiful, gorgeous Art Case Steinway grand piano, and it looks a lot different from your upright pianos that became the norm in those apartment settings. That was an example of a manufacturer or series of manufacturers saying, hey, we have to adapt. We have to adapt the instrument to fit the spaces of how they're living now.
In fact, it was pianos that pretty much started NAMM as we know it, because it was
piano manufactured dealers of America, turn of the century, and they started in New York and represented all the piano makers in New York before they said, hey, there's a whole ecosystem out here that we represent as well, before they became NAMM.
Very cool. Well, we're going to move on to the next part, and this is my favorite part because I jumped into the music business. We're going to go look at some electronic keyboards. So stay with us, folks, and we'll be right there. All right, we are now in one of my favorite spots, the electronic keyboard section here. Now, we took a little walk through, and we're honored to have you because you're one of the guys that make this thing happen. People can have actually guided tours. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Tell us about the guided tour. Like, we got you, so they're not going to always get BJ.
They'll get more accurate people taking them through, and telling them the stories behind all the instruments. But you can choose to do walk-in tours. A lot of folks just come through and do walk-in tours. They take their time. You can spend about 2-3 hours in here, especially when you get to the interactive portions of the museum. There's a lot of instruments you can sit down, pick up, play.
It wasn't always interactive.
We always had a little bit, but we've we learned that it was a really popular part of the experience, so we've expanded that over the years.
Yeah.
This is another one of our vignettes, and so what this represents is the changing technology, like going from vacuum tubes to transistors to microprocessors. How did that affect instruments? What technology was affecting the design, the application, and the creation of these instruments? So a more, there's no more fitting, in my opinion, example of that, and then the changing nature of the keyboard instruments, going from patch cables to digital synthesizers, the DX7, like groundbreaking instrument, using the digital modeling, from the Moog, from the old theremin. The theremin was like
Michael Bodeker's.
Yeah, there was the Nova chord, Bodekers, but the theremin was Lev Theremin created it. Bob Moog, loved that. He made his own kit, so we have a Moog theremin in here. Okay. And then took that idea and came up with the mini Moog out of that. And taking the oscillators, the technology that was there, transforming it into something that was familiar, a keyboard instrument that people could relate to. You don't really look at this and like, that's a musical instrument. I mean, unless you in the know like what a theremin is.
Yeah, it looks more like a radio.
Yeah, it's becoming more popular. People know what theremins are. Maybe not everyone, but they definitely know what a keyboard looks like. I'd say a larger percentage of people can say that's a piano keyboard.
So we're going to go on to our next set here, which is we're going to look at one of the instruments that I won't give it away just yet, but it surprised me that it was made in Africa, because I would have thought it would have been made in Europe. So at least the originations of it. So stay with us, and we're going to be going to the banjo.
Oh, okay. I got you.
All right, DJ, we are now at the banjo and ukulele exhibit. And this is a fun one because, again, folks, my first tour of the museum, I was blessed to know from Carolyn Grant how the banjo was pretty much transformed from a gourd and a couple of strings on a stick, and that was created in Africa, of all places. And then, of course, now we have the banjo, and we've got manufacturers like our here in our backyard, we got Deering Banjo. Tell us a bit about that and the transition and the growth of the banjo and the ukulele.
Yeah, well, this vignette represents different waves of popularity. So, as you may or may not know, like the ukulele and the banjo, they have progressed through different, musical surgences. Like we had the Hawaiian music come through in the early 50s, and then back in the 70s there's another resurgence with Tiny Tim, and even modern resurgences with artists like Jake Shimabukuro, who are bringing it back to the mainstream.
He's going to be back here at the Balboa Theater.
Yeah, exceptional players, creating this, generating this interest in the instrument, these really easily accessible instruments. The same holds true with the banjo. The early waves of the 1910s, 1920s, and you're correct. It was the origin story of the banjo goes all the way back to West Africa. It's not a pleasant story either, because this had to do with the trading of human lives. And there's dark undertones to that story, but eventually, as the evolution of the instrument came to be, it's one of the first original musical forms that had transformed into the banjo what it is today, but it rode those similar waves of popularity through early ragtime music, and then now you see it, another riding another wave here in modern music with what's the band? What's the name of the band? I forgot now. Mumford & Sons.
Oh, Mumford & Sons.
Right?
Okay.
And even right now, like you mentioned Deering Banjo, Jamie Deering and the entire family and the entire company has been continuing to innovate on the banjo. They have the Cabanjo, which is a 6-string banjo with the pickups built into the body of the instrument, and familiar tunings. If you're a guitarist, you can easily adapt to the Cabanjo because it's a similar guitar tuning.
Correct me if I'm wrong. That's the #1 banjo manufacturer in the world.
That I don't know, because there are so many manufacturers. Deering is regarded as one of the premier banjo manufacturers.
And then same going back to Taylor, is one of the top, if not the top, acoustic.
Again, we don't operate in extremes here. Like we don't say this is the best, this is the first, this is the last. We just want to showcase like what these companies and makers are doing to continue to help us make music, to continue to innovate, and to continue to present innovations that break down those barriers for people to.
And the Padres, Taylor, daring. All the San Diego things are the best. I'm just joking.
San Diego is the best. Yes.
We are the finest city. Well, we've got a chance to see this. We've got so much more to look at, folks. Come along with us to the next exhibit. We'll be right back. Alrighty, we're here actually in one of my favorite exhibits that's been here since I've been coming. It's the Beatle exhibit. Well, I shouldn't say the Beatle exhibit, but you get a lot of Beatle influence here. You've got the old Ludwig drum set that Ringo played on. You've got the Hofner bass and Gretsch guitars, Rickenbacker. So tell us a bit about this exhibit, and is this still a fan favorite for people to come through and check out?
Well, I love it. It's a gorgeous exhibit for me. So in this space, this is our second gallery. So we talk about providing those instruments, what it's like to go to your local retail store.
We were at earlier.
Right? And so this is kind of a callback to what the museum was when it first opened up, a kind of a chronological story. We look at different eras. And so this is the 1960s to 1980s. We talk about changes in society, changes in the economy, changes in, artists creating music. Being in front of mass media, which it's a new concept. And when you have that mass media sharing your music to millions of people, millions of kids who love music and maybe want to emulate those artists, then you look at I was Black Oyster Pearl Ludwig drums. I want the Gretsch Countryman. I want that same left-handed Hofner bass for my band too. Then you see retailers who would have these items stocked in their store flying off the shelves. Now these are the same era of instruments that the Beatles used. They're not their instruments because they would be behind like bulletproof glass if you saw them here in the museum. But these are actually period, those instruments you would find if you were back in the 60s. That was a hugely influential band, creating hugely influential music that influenced a whole generation of music makers who might not have been. I know that there is an anecdotal story from Bill Ludwig at the time, because it was unheard of. Beatles are a British band, right? And so the British drums were premier drums. But Ludwig, Ringo was very proud of the fact that he had an American-made Ludwig drum kit. He's like, put the name of Ludwig on that drum head. And so people saw that, Ludwig drums, and they couldn't keep those drums on the shelves because people kept buying Ludwig drums. It was a boon for them to have them appear on that.
I'm going to make up a number like 1,000% growth, but
I can't even recite that number. I'm going to have to go to the history books for that one.
I can give the fake news here, but it was something large like that.
It was influential. It had a massive influence on their products.
Very cool. Well, let's go take a look at some more instruments and the retailers that brought them to the people and to the all these different whether they're hobbyist musicians or whether they're professional musicians. Let's go talk about some retailers and what they've been able to accomplish.
Awesome.
All right. Well, we're here in retail land with BJ Morgan again, and we've got a pretty cool display of what I would say, early music retailer with everything from horns to guitars to record players.
Yeah, and toasters and waffle irons too.
Oh, okay. Tell us about this display, BJ.
All right, so let's go back to the 30s and the 40s.
Yes.
Right? Remember what's going on in America? Great Depression.
Depression, yeah.
And then we got thrown into wartime, right?
Yeah.
So major crises in America at this time. So what you had is retailers trying to manage the best of a bad situation, which is why we see toaster ovens and tea kettles in our retail store, because
musicians need toast.
Well, you need to. If I was on a budget like I've never experienced in my life and had nothing, and I needed to pay the rent or buy groceries, I might have to sell you my piano. I might have to give you my piano or sell you my toaster oven to just get a little, something to eke out a living. And music retailers at this time, they were not, they had to adapt too. So they might take that in. And then you kind of see that still echo today where your local pawn shops, where, you have musical instruments right next to your jewelry, right next to your toaster ovens and waffle irons. So there's an echo of that past, that history, still in today's recent history. And so when we get through that crisis and we get into the wartime, then we had to ration our materials. So we might not be able to make those nice Zildjian cymbals out of those alloys that we expect to use.
Yeah, because that was going to a tank or some kind of bullet somewhere.
Right, or we might not be able to make all the pianos that we want to make because we might change our factory to make airplane wings,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
making compass parts, or making what have you that we needed to change in that time period. So this represents that storyline, what retailers were going through and how they changed and had to innovate and adapt when they had all this turmoil to face. I mean,
Yeah, it's such a cool way to look at music instruments and how they made a difference. And in fact, that was one of the things that still kept going, from what I understand, during World War II and the Depression, was music, and entertainers were still able to make a living predominantly, and that was one of the go-to things for people, because other things just weren't, you just couldn't get a job doing factory work as easily.
well,
at least
that,
during the Great
yeah,
Depression.
that too, and then later in the museum, when you come here and take the tour and go through the entire gallery, we have one of the last spaces we have is beyond the instruments. So this is when instruments become more than themselves, more than just something that makes music, which is amazing. It's an amazing human element, but they also take on characteristics that they can become art pieces. They can become comfort. They can become places of environmental change and social change. And so one thing that came out of this, yes, when musicians, when the government recognized, like, oh, we need to make sure people have morale in these, positive morale in these terrible circumstances, Steinway was commissioned to build pianos specifically to be flown behind enemy lines. So hardy pianos. We have one of these pianos later in the galleries. It's painted like drab olive green, sturdy, and was there to help troops maintain their morale through war. And then instruments played a key role in that, and just helping us cope.
Yeah. So hopefully, folks, get your kids to pick up more instruments, create more hope. No.
Awesome.
In these crazy times. So we're going to go on to, speaking of that, place where you can actually jam while you're here at the Museum of Making Music.
Yes.
So follow us, folks. We'll be right back. Well, we're here in my favorite spot, and for two reasons. A, I get a chance to sit down now. This is my spot now. We are in the jamming room, in the place to play a little bit.
And this is your new favorite spot, because this is brand new. This whole experience is brand new.
Exactly.
So we're going to reserve that chair for you whenever you come back to the
I'm
museum.
gonna put a sign right here.
Exactly.
So BJ, tell us about what people can do here, because you've got a few different instruments, and tell us about the level of instruments, because that's also a big one, because sometimes you don't get a chance to jam with the best of the best. You get a chance to play the stuff that's good, but not like what we have here.
Right. So we're in the backstage lounge. This is the name of this area, is the backstage lounge.
Okay.
All throughout the museum, we have little sit and play areas. So as you're learning about the manufacturers or the retailers or wherever you are, there's a little section that you can sit down, try out the instruments that you're learning about in that area too. But here is really, like you said, it's the cool jam room. And this kind of has your almost like a living room vibe. You can sit on these really nice comfy chairs, grab really nice guitars. I mean, we got some Paul Reed Smith guitars.
Yeah.
We've got some exceptional Fender basses. We've got some, wonderful Strats. We've got our Dreadnoughts, our Martins, our Taylor, 813s. Really, really nice top shelf guitars, which you really don't, if you walk into a music store, they might not go up the ladder to get the guitar off the top shelf for you to play. But here, that's what we want. We want you to try out those guitars.
What is the one that it's a Telly, but I don't recognize the it's not a Fender.
That's a great question. That is not a Fender. Is that that's not a Godin. I'm gonna have to look that up for you, because I can't reach out there and grab it and look for it, because I'm tethered to my chair right now.
Somebody's got an Infinity logo right next to it, obviously.
Yeah.
There's a Fender.
You want to grab it?
Yeah, let's grab it.
Let's grab it.
Let's grab it.
All right, let me see what it is. This is a Chapman guitar.
Never heard of it.
And as you know, I'm not a guitarist, so if you ask me to play it, it will be played poorly. But yeah, it's the same.
Well, Paul, our show producer, who's behind the camera, is really the guitar guru.
I apologize. I'm not familiar with this instrument. So I mean, I know Chapman sticks, like Emmett Chapman. I don't know if it's from the same manufacturer.
It's a pretty guitar.
But it's a gorgeous guitar. It's solid, and you can just pick it up and try it out. We have headphones. We have little adapter packs you can put on here. Play your jam to your heart's content.
There you go, folks. Come here, play an acoustic, play an electric. There's even a bass.
Piano, harp. We got a harp
There's
here
a
if you want to
harp.
try a harp out.
Yeah. If you want to call the angels, you play the harp.
We got a theremin too. You can play a theremin if you want. It's it's in the family area. We have a one for kids and students and families. This is kind of like you tend to get your adults hanging out in the backstage lounge, and the families they go crazy in the center stage area.
Oh, awesome. Well, BJ, thank you for bringing us on tour here to see the museum, folks. You got to come here. You got to check it out. What is a ticket or a tour cost?
Oh, it's $15 for an adult ticket, $10 for students, seniors, active military.
Okay.
So it's not gonna break the bank. Free parking. Come here and get free parking. We're open 6 days a week, Tuesday through Sunday. We're closed on Mondays, major holidays. We open up at 10 a.m. We close at 5 p.m. So it's a great weekend activity.
Does that also include the guided tour, or is that just?
If you want a guided tour, I recommend scheduling that in advance. And we typically want, if you're going to have a guided tour like that, we want to do it for a group of people. Get maybe like 8 or 10 of your friends along.
Or start a magazine / podcast. And then, then BJ will come and
call us a couple weeks in advance, and we'll get something on the books for you.
Awesome. Well, folks, thank you very much for joining us here at the UnsceneSD for a segment of Unseen. Let's make this now not an unseen. Make this the to-do event for everyone who loves music, which should be everybody. So my name is Florentino Buenaventura, BJ Morgan, and we'll see you on the next one. We're out.